Hello. We are cheating and breaking hiatus a bit with a not special edition graphic to cover the Bitmain IPO. So it is block height question mark question mark question mark because my 10-year-old hard drive finally failed and I had to improvise with the graphics. But what's going on, Rick and Ginny?
Up, guys? Yeah, we're taking a little bit of a break from the hiatus. There's a lot of news been breaking, but I think there's this specific story is pretty interesting. We had to break from it to cover it.
Jihan, what time is it?
Woe is Jihan. Yeah, so I'm sure you guys noticed that two slide decks from the IPO leaked. And really, there's a bunch of financial breakdowns. A lot of Bitmain's long-term business plans kind of confirmed. And two slide decks. So one of the I'll just call them the orange and the blue. One of them is a little bit older, and the second one, the blue one, is a little more recent and has a little bit more financial information. But to first start off, I kind of wanted to point out one thing in the first slide deck that I haven't really seen too many people talk about, except Samson just kind of make a rough tweet about it. And I had some figures based on this setup, but they might be a little off. I'm just kind of pulling them from memory. But pretty much right here is a breakdown of the company assets in 2016, 2017, and the first quarter of 2018. And this green section here is pretty much the hash rate or the mining equipment that they're sitting on. And this would put in the first quarter of 2018 that at a value of $1.2 billion of hardware. And now this can get pretty wiggly depending on how they're actually doing the internal accounting for this. But if I'm remembering correctly, and if I go back and redo the napkin math at the end of the show and find out that I was just way off pulling from memory, I'll probably put something out on Twitter to correct myself. But like, to kind of break this down, like, you have to figure out how they're valuing this hardware. And so I ran a little bit of napkin math at different valuations based on different things. And so I pretty much ran these numbers assuming that this is almost all S9s at $4,400 per unit, which was the sale price around the beginning of the year, around $13.50, I believe, which, assuming that the production costs are roughly a third of what the retail was at the start of year. And then I ran the numbers again, assuming they were valued at 800, which is what they slashed the price, I believe, to around How Long's first hitting the scene, and then 400, which is, or 485, excuse me, which is roughly what the market price of an S9 for Bitmain is right now. And so, depending on these different valuations, you get a different estimate of how much actual hash rate this is, again, assuming that it's all S9s. But at around 4,400, so assuming that this was based on the retail value of this at the beginning of the year, this would be about 3.9 exahash. So if they're doing their accounting at 4,400 per unit, that's 3.9 exahash kind of just sitting around gathering dust. If they're doing this accounting based on my guess of what the production cost would be, which would be around 1,300 or so, or a third of the retail price start of year, it would be around 11 exahash. If they did the accounting around $800, which is what they slashed to meet how long, it would be around 21 exahash. And if these figures are based on the current retail value of around $485, this would be 35 exahash of hash rate that they just have sitting around unsold. And so now, without really any like more internal information, there's nothing we can really do except kind of guess, like I did, how they're doing this internal accounting. But I mean, given like, I tried to be as educated in my guesses as possible, looking at the retail price at the start of the year, my guess at the production cost, and then more recent valuations of the hardware. But depending on that range, you're talking potentially like anywhere from around 4 exahash to almost like almost 40, like somewhere in the 30 range of idle hash rate just sitting there unused. And I kind of wanted to specifically talk about this for a minute because if anybody who's been watching the special editions we've been doing lately, the first one we did was with Jonathan Bertrand from Quebec, and we were kind of discussing the regulatory changes going on there in terms of taxes levied specifically against miners and data centers, the large amount of bids for power from Hydro Quebec, and the involvement of Bitmain kind of opening a subsidiary in Canada, and speculation potentially of their involvement in the bids and trying to coordinate backdoor deals with Hydro Quebec for access to electricity. And kind of looking at like the balance sheet that's come out in these pre-IPO slide decks, it really has me reconsidering like my opinion and Jonathan's opinion at the time that a lot of these bids for chunks of power from Hydro Quebec were just complete bluffs, that they were total bullshit. Because I mean, we can't really make any definitive assessment of this without kind of introducing guesswork. But like I've tried looking at the figures from like the best case scenario in terms of like my point of view to the worst case. And that's anywhere between like 4 to like 30 something exahash of idle power that could be sitting there. And looking at that, like I don't think it's too unreasonable, one, to think that some of those power bids were legitimate, and two, this kind of reinforces like an attitude I've had for quite a while, that when it comes to the decentralization of actual hash rate control, we're not really looking at production as the bottleneck anymore. It's access to electricity. Because I mean, like, blow this out to the extreme worst case and say that Bitmain is sitting on 30 exahash of hash rate. That's more than half the network hash rate. They can't find the electricity to actually run it.
Yeah, I mean that probably would explain some of those large orders at Hydro Quebec, but also that recent purchase there near Austin, where they were trying to gain access to this old power plant and aluminum smelting plant, so they could just set up there. Yeah, it's one of those things where there is a lot of guesswork involved, and I'm curious where their guesswork goes. I'm sure it's pretty positive for those investors overlooking this assessment whenever they're hearing their little speech there. But it's definitely some interesting insight to, just extra hardware sitting on the ground, not really adding hash rate to the overall hash rate of Bitcoin. So it's, I don't know, it definitely does. Like I was saying before in previous episodes, is that mining is always a multiple equations, what kind of gets me confused, and I just leave it to the miners. But this definitely gives us a little bit more information and insight into what exactly they're doing with their hardware. Since it's been a problem there in China, it doesn't look like they've actually found a place to set up shop and really start mining like they were in China. So yeah, they're probably going to be facing some regulatory hurdles here in North America too, just based on the whole Chinese-U.S. political relations and intelligence and technology, and how there's a little bit of a political narrative saying that there's too much control there as it stands right now. So yeah, they might get some pushback on that. And I'm sure they're just trying to get as many contracts and places set up as quick as they can. Because like if they really did this move as far as flipping over Bitcoin for Bitcoin Cash, they're certainly going to have to start searching for other places for revenue to try and bring back any profits for these investors that are coming in for this IPO that's coming up supposedly.
Mm-hmm. And Rad's asking in the chat if we think that they've pretty much pissed off the community so much that people just aren't buying their equipment on principle. And I really do not think that that has anything to do with it. I mean, at the end of the day, miners are in it to make money. Like they don't care where their equipment is coming from. They care about if it's profitable, if it's going to last in operation, and if they're going to be able to hit their ROI and make a profit. And ultimately, I think that this has more to do with one, them trying to monopolize the supply time of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, the TSMC, which is where they actually get their chips made. And it is like the biggest semiconductor manufacturer in the world. And, you know, as we'll go in the next slide deck after we kind of move past this, like that is a huge thing that they're kind of advertising to potential investors is a very close relationship with TSMC. And like you're not going to develop that relationship without huge orders. And so really like the surplus, what I think it comes down to is one, Jihan miscalculating where the price is going to go, and two, him being obsessed with kind of really solidifying that relationship with TSMC. Because like right now, almost every mining hardware out there on the market from a respectable company is more energy efficient than the Bitmain S9. And like it's just at these prices, it's not profitable to run an S9. Like if you're buying one now, unless we really turn the price around and start moving upwards fast, like it's not that likely you're going to hit your ROI. And so I think like he's just really overextended himself trying to kind of position everything in the company specifically for this IPO and to try and draw in investor money.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I was like getting a message there, but I do think like just whenever it comes to people buying the hardware on principle, yeah, I think the miners are going to take what they can get and try and get that earnings when they can. But like I imagine Bitmain's probably holding down some of that hardware just in desperation that some of these contracts get approved and they can set up shop as quick as possible.
I think if anything, like it's they're holding on to it because it's just not profitable. Like they can't really sell that much hardware. And like I think that the expansions to try to like set up all of these farms internationally and get access to electricity internationally, it's just like they have no choice. Like ultimately, when you really step back and look at this could wind up being the exact same situation as their massive Bcash holdings. Like this hardware could wind up just being a giant loss that they just have to eat and just deal with it.
Yeah, it's it's an interesting thing to like leave for the hiatus. And I had this like thought with this aluminum smelting in the power plant and just Bitmain's expansion. It was like, man, this company is just too powerful. But yeah, you start to look inside and the decision making. It's like, oh man, I was giving them a little too much credence.
Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know. That's really mostly what I wanted to say and kind of break this down, just because I haven't really seen a lot of people like really talk about this aspect of information in the slide decks. Like everybody seems to kind of just be concentrating on the B cash holdings and what that means for their valuation. But before we get back to like actually going through the slide decks, Janine had something she wanted to say.
Yeah, this was based on one of the reaction articles that I read, which was by Crypto Herpes Cat. It got a lot of attention, also because of the name. But one of the points that they make, which I don't think they offer a conclusion either way, as far as when I remember reading it, is about people speculating on whether Bitmain was actually selling Bitcoin for Bitcoin Cash. That was the assumption they made based on the changing amount of assets for each coin. But there, at least according to when I looked through the slide deck, I didn't see any evidence of them actually saying like that they were doing that. Really, only the slide deck shows that they were increasing the amount of Bitcoin Cash that they were holding and decreasing the amount of Bitcoin. So it's entirely possible they were selling the Bitcoin in exchange for more Bitcoin Cash. But I didn't see any direct evidence of that in the slide deck. So it could be that they're either just holding on to their Bitcoin Cash and they're mining it. Maybe they're buying more, and then they're selling off their Bitcoin, probably as the way to pay the bills and all of that.
Yeah, I thought I saw it was mainly OTC and peer to peer. I mean, like, yeah, I don't know exactly their holdings either.
I mean, potentially, but when you really look at it, here actually let's actually go look on Coin Market Cap. But like ultimately, it really comes down to like where most of the volume was coming from. And I mean, honestly, the one thing, at least from my vantage point, that really seems to be bothering a lot of B cashers and really seems to be the more important market in terms of effect is like, Bitcoin. Like they're like, even when you're looking at the volume in US dollars, like it's trying to maintain that peg against Bitcoin because that's ultimately what's going to be affecting the mining and then the hash rate that's actually devoted to Bcash, because they're looking at it kind of against Bitcoin in terms of opportunity cost, as far as like, are they going to devote hash rate to Bitcoin or to Bcash? And I mean, like we can even look, like I've never even heard of this exchange right now. Like 55% of the 24-hour volume on Bcash is against USDT on Bitforex, and like almost every other market is like just a negligible percent. Okay. Okay, so I guess that's looking at that, you're right. There's not really any definitive evidence to show massive amount of Bitcoin being sold unless it went OTC. But I mean,
That's what I just saw on the slide. One of those slides it mentioned like their their business strategy for selling, and that's where I saw that OTC.
but ultimately, like it's still the same net effect in terms of the company's liabilities itself. I mean, like Bitcoin is the thing with the most liquidity, the most potential upside in terms of just passively increasing the net worth of the company's assets. And I mean, their Bcash holdings, like that's insane. Like they literally have 1 million Bcash. Like 3% of that, like 30,000 Bcash, would completely wipe the books on Bitfinex dry. Like unless they were willing to find somebody, or somebody was willing to take that off their hands OTC, they cannot liquidate that. Like they just can't. like a massive amount of Bitcoin holdings. Like they could find OTC buyers. There's large liquidity for that. There's access to futures markets to hedge against slippage if they went to move it on the market. But like that much Bcash, like they literally cannot liquidate it. Like that's just assets that they're stuck with a fantasy like valuation.
So a thought just popped into my mind because we've seen over the past weeks. I think it was actually mostly happening after we went on hiatus. But if anyone follows, there's a Twitter account that actually tweets out when people in the Bcash community follow or unfollow or like tweets. And there has been a lot of unfollowing in the last 2 weeks. What was the latest one? Let me check. But while I'm looking for that, I mean, clearly there's been a schism between Craig Wright and Jihan Wu for quite a long time. And so I would be curious to know whether it has come to Jihan Wu's attention that, the fact that he holds all of that Bcash is like, that's like a major playing card for him, because if there's any kind of hard fork split or something, like if he sells that off, he could like seriously damage whatever fork Craig Wright ends up on. Like he can use that as leverage.
Oh man, what a dynamic game they play. And I'm curious, like if the investors that are coming in for this IPO understand any of this risk and exactly how it all kind of shakes out. I think they're starting to get an idea now that the community's weighing in a little bit on this information now that we have it. But I doubt they're really promoting the fact that there is like this whole inside little warfare going on within that community that a lot of their assets are tied up in, and they can't really. It's not really liquid at all because, like you were saying, Shinobi, if they just start moving that to the exchange, it's going to go somewhere way low.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like ultimately, they could do that, Janine, but like that would be shooting themselves in the dick just as much. Because you're already talking a fragmentation of liquidity at that point, which makes it even worse as far as like their holdings on whatever side in the event of a split they want to support. But like they could damage another chain, but they're just damaging themselves in the process. And I mean, ultimately, like after IPO, like they're not going to be the only ones trying to influence what they're actually doing. I mean, I don't think they're just selling enough shares to completely lose control of the company, but like there's going to be other people involved in decision making and kind of pushing for different directions.
It's definitely a risky business, man. Risky business plan, and it's like a lot more. Like I was just saying earlier, it just makes this whole IPO kind of come into a different light.
Mm-hmm. All right. Screen share set, Gene. Or whoops, hold on, stupid JavaScript.
Nothing's working today.
I'm still looking for one last one. Where is Gavin Andreessen?
Oh, this is funny.
Okay, so I could have sworn that, because I know that Craig Wright also unfollowed Gavin Andreessen recently. But the other two unfollows that were significant was that Vinny Lingham unfollowed Craig Wright, and then the second one, which I don't actually remember unless you open it. Professor Faustus Craig Wright also unfollowed Rick Falkfinge, who makes those terrible videos about Segwit coin or whatever he wants to call Bitcoin. So yeah, there's a lot of community fragmentation. So I mean, I feel like whatever Bitmain decides to do is probably not going to solve this. Like it's not going to be a good band-aid on this situation.
That Vinny one is really, really fucking hilarious. Because after me and John schooled the shit out of him last year regarding the entire NYA agreement and the UASF. He was talking to me for a while, and I was pretty much trying to warn him about Craig and just explaining why his whole SegWit is illegal, is bullshit, and why, you know, with nodes enforcing things, the miners stealing SegWit is nonsense. And he just dug in and defended Craig. So it took him, what, a year of being a complete idiot to finally realize, hey, shit, wow, this guy is really a scammer.
Yeah, I figured that was yeah, it's a comical thing to see Vinny pop back up after that conversation because he hasn't really showed up that much except to say something about Civic. But yeah, I guess he's still playing around with that whole side of things.
Yeah. All right, though. I'm going to dive back into the second slide deck, though, because we've
All right,
been
let's
on
do
for
it.
what, like 20 something minutes now. All right.
Yeah.
So the second deck is mostly some financial information and then aspect of the business plans. But like this is just a bunch of stupid, like, this is blockchain nonsense. That's how blockchains work, blah, blah, blah. The only thing I really wanted to point out here and just kind of speculate about other instances of it is, where did that go? Yeah, when referring to Bitcoin, they're still claiming there is a 1 megabyte block size limit. And, you know, it might seem kind of insignificant and like a small detail, but given the fact that they're making this claim when it is like Jihan understands how this fucking works. Like, he's not that stupid. And yet here in his company's slide deck for a pre-IPO round, like moving towards an initial public offering, he's sitting here misrepresenting things to the investors that he's trying to get money from. And so, like, I just kind of wanted to point that out. And like, what else is he misrepresenting? Like, what other information that hasn't come out that he's going around showing to investors? Or what kind of things is he saying behind closed doors, pretty much just lying to these people and trying to make it seem like his position in Bcash is a rational business move and something that they should invest in? But one thing that this slide deck confirms, aside from like this slide is pretty much just the history of mining evolution from CPU to GPU to ASIC and so on. But he's looking also at the ASIC market for AIs and kind of looking here like this in the translation process. It kind of distorted a little bit of the text just because of the spacing with Chinese characters. But this gray pie chart right here is supposed to be 19%. And this represents, in 2017, the market share of ASICs dealing with AI versus FPGA, CPU, GPU. And we can kind of see this year, like, that's exploded by about 10% of the overall share. So it's gone from around 19% to 30% of, you know, deep learning chip markets moving into ASICs. And while the GPU segment has stayed relatively constant, the CPU market has stayed relatively constant. The FPGA market is kind of getting eaten into by ASICs. And that's actually a lot of what's really covered in this slide in terms of business models. But like, here is, again, like I said earlier, they're like, in terms of the surplus mining hardware, me thinking that mostly has to do with trying to solidify relationships with TSMC. We can see here in their entire like supply chain analysis of the entire crypto ecosystem, they're looking at TSMC as the one thing kind of downwind from them, and then moving to the IC or integrated circuit design manufacturer, blah, blah, blah. Like, they're looking at themselves, Canon and eBay in this, then mine operations, pool operators, and then currency exchanges, the actual currency, blah, blah, blah. This is mostly just a price analysis and trading volume. and then more evolution of mining. And then here we get into the company profile, where they're kind of pretty much mostly just trying to sell themselves and their competence. They have over 2,500 people employed, 90% of which have college degrees, 40% have a master's or a doctoral degree. And then specifically, they're pointing out their SOFON line of AI ASICs and kind of looking at the fact that they are the second largest integrated circuit designer in China, second only to Huawei. And they're looking like really at the end of the day in terms of competing with, NVIDIA, Intel, AMD. Like a lot of people tend to look at Bitmain as if like these companies are just going to swat them with a fly event or swat them like a fly eventually. But really, like this has been the long-term game plan for this company from the beginning. Like this wasn't just like a quick let's go make money while we can and then we're going to get slaughtered. Like they started this company to compete with big giants like Nvidia and Intel. And I mean specifically in regards to the entire AI ASIC line. Like a lot of people I don't think are really aware of this, but Jihan is not the sole CEO of Bitmain. There is another CEO, McCree Zahn, I think is his name, that is kind of the techie guy. Like, he was the one who was first approached by Jihan about starting the company as the one with the hardware design expertise. And Jihan kind of offering himself as like the businessman or the public face of things. And really from the very beginning, McCree's interest was in chips for artificial intelligence. Like his main goal was not mining cryptocurrencies and just selling miners. And he kind of looked at this company when he started it with Jihan as like cryptocurrencies are a way to bypass large upfront investments. Like, Jihan was able to bankroll a lot of it with his own personal holdings and a small select private investments. And then the massive growth in the cryptocurrency space was kind of that bootstrap phase. And we can kind of look here, like this is pretty much the development path history of the entire company. We can see like 2013, it was initially established, and the end of that year, they had actually produced their first generation of ASIC chips and moved on. And then 2015, so 3 years ago, they started designing the AI chips, like what would eventually become the SOFON line. And then the next year in 2016, they hit 16 nanometer fabrication for the SHA-256 ASICs. The S9 came out. And then last year in 2017 was when they really quickly iterated through 3 different generations of the SOFON AI chips. And towards the end of the year, have finally actually launched that product line. And one of the main things that's doing is I think like the only actual complete product they have right now is actually for video analysis. So to really kind of put those pieces together, I mean, one of the like I've been rambling about this for months and months and months about the potential for AI applications in terms of the Chinese government surveillance state. And I mean, one of the first products Bitmain's actually released is specifically an AI server for analyzing video. And like the Chinese government has gone crazy in the past few years applying this. Like they literally have systems where for jaywalking, you will have a computer system scan your face, throw it through facial recognition software, dock you a fine and ticket you, and then literally put your face up on a billboard on that street corner and publicly shame you. Like they have police officers right now who over the last year or so have started deploying augmented reality glasses when patrolling public areas to look for fugitives. Like, this always has been, at least from McCree's point of view. Like, I'll speak to Jihan in a minute, but this has always been the point of this company. Like, this was their business model. This was where they were going long term. Like, it was not monopolize Bitcoin mining manufacturing and just do that forever. Like, this was the goal. Artificial intelligence ASICs and applications for that, which for the most part are really surveillance and then, data analysis, which, yes, you could argue is not surveillance, but I mean, realistically, the biggest application of data analysis in this day and age is going to be for surveillance purposes.
Yeah, I think I actually brought that up as a question during that special edition about Quebec mining. And I think I also mentioned it in another episode where we were talking about the crystal thing that, what's it called? What is that company? Bitfury. Yeah. Yeah, and so like ever since we did that episode where I went over the Bitfury stuff, I've been wondering what the connection was between mining companies and surveillance. Like, it just seems like an odd combination, but this makes it really obvious how those two things are connected. And yeah, so not looking forward to that business model getting more popular.
Yeah, that's a pretty Orwellian thing to look at. I mean, one of the guys I know, some of these blockchain guys around here are working on something similar, and every time they discuss it, I'm just like kind of holding my breath, like, oh man, that is not cool. But all these people are working on different things, but that is, yeah, it's pretty sad looking, bleak outlook if that thing gets implemented everywhere. But yeah, that's pretty bad, man. Shaming people on the street corner for jaywalking. Like, what if there was no cars coming? It's like clear as day.
Well, I mean, if China ever wants to try a non-technical implementation of that, they could do what Germans do and yell "child murderer" at people who jaywalk.
I don't know. That is a little bit more local than just throwing your face up on a billboard. So yeah, that works a little better.
It's effective. Kindermort.
That seems a bit extreme.
Kindermort.
Yeah, but you guys can play cover for me for just a second. I have to go deal with my stupid cat.
Oh man, your stupid cat. My cat's been laying under the bed for days now. I've been out and about.
Yeah, so I actually ended up finding the tweet from the Big Blockers account where I think it was, let me check once. I didn't look at the date. I think it was the 12th.
Yeah, it wasn't long ago.
August 12th. Craig Wright unfollows Gavin Andreessen. I just find that it's downright hilarious because the whole reason that Craig Wright even has a voice in this space is because Gavin Andreessen basically trashed his reputation to give this guy like whatever ounce of credibility he could get among the really gullible people in Bitcoin. And so the fact that they've now broken up that relationship is just so hilarious. Like, I don't know where he's going to go from here, but I mean, Gavin is such a fool for falling for this game. And now now all he has left is a reputation in the trash.
Oh man, that was that was a pretty fun one to see.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, this part in particular is one of the things that really got kind of bastardized, I think, in the translation of this. Like, we can see that Jihan, through some holding companies, has roughly 20% of stake in Bitmain. And then some other of the initial private investors kind of have things broken up with spot for corporate investors. And then the Janky Group, I really am not even trusting that is an accurate translation, because I mean, when you really run some of these Chinese documents through Google Translate, that's like, Bitmain will half the time come through as like Bitcontinent or like Bitcoin, and it's like it's just a horrible representation. But from my unofficial understanding, just talking to some people behind the scenes, I think that share is tied to McCree, because from my understanding, he does have slightly more influence in the company as far as stake wise than Gian. And so, like, again, like, sorry for kind of the lack of real clarity here, but this, there's not really many people I can actually talk to about this, or really talk to kind of try and get a more clear grasp from the actual Chinese version. And it's kind of what we have to go off of. But we can kind of see that they have a holding company in the Cayman Islands, and then a subsidiary in Hong Kong, and then another branch in China. And they've kind of broken up like the company through a number of holding groups. And this slide area with the core team, like, I don't really want to run through and break down, every person, but the links are in the show notes for people who actually want to dig through this. But most of these people listed here are actually specifically clarified as being involved in artificial intelligence design, and mostly dealing with kind of the AI products and platforms they're planning on building. And like, you can really see, like, going through these slides, that AI is like, it's constantly put up there. Like, the three prongs of their business they keep pointing out are ASICs for mining, their mining pools, and then the AI line. Like, it is very prominently displayed in the slide deck, and it's clearly a major thing that people at Bitmain want to kind of convey in terms of like why investors should invest in them. And then they've also kind of broken down analysis of market share overall for their the mining side of the business. Like, we can see that pretty much they've got close to 70% of the market share in terms of sales versus Canon. And again, this is kind of really screwed in the translation. This is referring to a company member of Canon in a few of the places, so it's not really referring to it by the company name. And I'm not exactly clear why things are actually phrased that way in the actual Chinese document. But also kind of a breakdown of the sales in terms of actual individual mining equipment. So the S9 obviously is known. L3 is Litecoin equipment, D3 Dash equipment. The T9 is kind of a lower quality SHA-256 rig, and then the power supplies. And they actually, where did that go? There's them advertising their dominance in the mining pool industry. And then, okay, before I get back to the mining slide I was looking for, this is another segment on AI where they're kind of looking at the three different things that they're trying to branch into in terms of this. And one is like the actual analysis, or like ability to analyze things, which obviously is going to feed into things like video analysis, data analysis, products, kind of optimizing cloud services and products using big data, so specifically data analysis. And then really the creepiest thing, they specifically want to get into robotics and apply AI, and more specifically their ASICs for AI in robotics products. And so, like, that's, I mean,
Nightmarish.
yeah. I mean, like, it's really, really fucking disturbing to see a company like Bitmain in a place like China, and more specifically with somebody like Jihan Wu at the head of it, branching off into these kinds of things. Like, frankly, he is a complete piece of shit and an impulsive, selfish idiot. And we can also see their projections. Right now, the SOFON line is at the 28 nanometer scale in terms of the transistors. And they've actually just begun and are projecting by 2019 to move into more refined 12 nanometer size for their SOFON line. So they're kind of rapidly progressing in that after finally pushing out a product last year, the same way that they did initially in terms of the Bitcoin mining hardware. And then again, here's the slide I was looking for. So this is a breakdown of the revenue of the company. And so on the top 3 slides, this is the general business. With blue, I'm very positive is the mining aspect of the business, and green, the mining pools. Although I am kind of just speculating here. I was unable to get a translation off of that. And then on the bottom part, we can see the breakdown in terms of the actual specific hardware they're selling. So in 2016, 44% of their sales were S9s, 47 were S7s. And then we can see by the next year, they'd already completely phased out the S7s, and the 9s were taking up 57% of their sales, followed by 18% their Litecoin miners and 17% Dash miners. And then we can see by this year, the S9s have jumped to almost 70% of their total hardware equipment sales. Litecoin, percentage-wise, has kind of stayed pretty similar, but the Dash sales have pretty much completely collapsed from 17% to around 4%. And so we can kind of see like a big growth, really, in terms of the other. I hate to screen share on a laptop. Like other mining equipment they were selling, but it really quickly kind of collapsed with a huge continued growth in terms of their actual Bitcoin equipment. And then really the last thing I kind of wanted to get into is investments in external companies. So they've kind of broken down most of their investments, although not all of them. They put $100 million into Circle. They've put $5 million into OpenBazaar, $100 million into Babbitt, a Chinese service, $1 million. Wait, 1,010. Yeah, I say okay. That's $1 million into Bitcon, a Chinese digital currency news source. $2 million into Via BTC, which is a investment of theirs that they've constantly tried to disassociate from and claim it is not controlled by Bitmain. They've put $1.5 million into yours.org. And then $7 million into Simplex, a credit card or sales services, and outright bought the Block Explorer / wallet Blocktrail. And they've really been kind of branching out and trying to sprawl themselves out and do as many business models as possible, while internally are really projecting, again, in this slide here, a massive growth in the ASIC market share of artificial intelligence hardware. And really, last thing I wanted to point out, so the last section is on risk management, and they're looking at operational compliance. They're following tax laws, industry access to different things. But the one thing is the respect of intellectual property rights. And like, just this is the most ludicrous fucking thing I've ever heard. Like, we're talking about the company who patent trolled, attempting to patent a serial power circuit design that is universally used all over the place. Like it's literally was used by every ASIC manufacturer in this ecosystem, including all of the companies that existed before Bitmain was even started as a company. So they're just patent trolling things that literally predated their existence. Like they blatantly violated the ASIC boost patent and integrated into their hardware after illegally, like they filed a false patent in China when the initial ASIC boost patent had actually followed and properly filed the right paperwork in China to be respected even as a foreign patent under intellectual property treaties with China. So this trying to paint themselves as respecting IP right laws is a joke. Like this is one of the most irresponsible and fast and loose companies in this space in terms of just blatantly disregarding and abusing patent laws. So like the way they're trying to present themselves like this to their investors, it's absurd.
Yeah, it certainly is, man. It's one of those where, trying to go back over all this that you covered a little bit, but it is like the whole blockchain, blah, blah, blah in there. I was reading that too. And it is like, man, who's really buying all this? And, as you're digging into this, telling me like about this, AI algorithms to, translate video and try and help surveillance and get that whole thing going. I mean, I know that's something that a lot of the Chinese government specifically interested in, but a lot of these intelligence agencies would be interested in, and the way that these contracts get thrown out for R&D on military contracts on things such as intelligence software and things like that. Sometimes get a lot of money thrown their way, even though the outlook might look kind of bleak. I mean, it's definitely a long-term plan there, and they're kind of on this teeter-totter point in their company as far as like, can they make this leap from Bitcoin to try and move outward? Like you're saying, their sales are going to these different ASIC coins, and they've been investing in an exchange, a marketplace, a news outlet, a mining pool to try and separate themselves, and a Yours social network and a block explorer. It feels like they're kind of setting up the ability to try and frame a narrative about whatever they choose to do in the space to try and help frame the information they want to for their investors. Because like we're saying, there's a lot of multi-layers to mining, and especially to these different networks that can, help maintain development on these coins. And so it's definitely not like they're getting the clearest picture, but I kind of have this background thought that they don't even really care if they see the long game is to try and pin down this surveillance equipment. I wouldn't be surprised if they are willing to take a loss on that. But yeah, once again, it's like Bitmain doesn't, it's like surprises me, like just how bad it's like really, I mean, like we're saying, the whole IPO thing and them moving and expanding and all that, it's kind of had this look of like, well, they just got a ton of money and they're spending it. But I mean, it does look like they're trying to expand and branch out into all this different stuff because they know that they're kind of in a rock and a hard place with their holdings and what exactly all their assets are on the books.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, the one thing, like, when you look at Bitmain supporting Bcash and ask yourself why, it's because it locks down access to the blockchain, to like running infrastructure, and it concentrates it heavily. And it pretty much, the way it works, like it precludes any kind of layered protocols on top. Like the Lightning Network is impossible because you need a watchtower or you need to run a node. Okay, like if you can't run a node, then you have to use a watchtower. And the degree of safeness, the degree of a lack of trust in watchtowers is how many of them there are. And if only the few big multi-million-dollar nodes out there can be a watchtower, then you have to trust these giant corporations to not get your money stolen on any kind of second layer protocol. And so you're pretty much forced into just using this centralized lockdown main chain that only a few people have access to, that will bloat so big that they can gatekeep even setting one up, because you have to get all of that data from somebody who has it to even start a node, and they can data mine it. They can surveil it. Like, it goes hand in hand with all of the work that's laid out in front of them in terms of AI ASICs and their research along those lines. Like, you plug that in side by side with Bcash, and you morph the entire cryptocurrency into a giant financial surveillance system.
Oh yeah, man. It's kind of frightening to think that like they're making that development and they're kind of moving in that direction. I mean, there's nothing we can really do to stop them, but I mean, like, it is one of those things, like you're saying. I mean, they have this, roadmap, and I think they're supposed to fork here not too long from now and try and develop something. I mean, maybe we need to put some developers in there and introduce some BIPs or something.
I mean, it's just like, you can't avoid that. I mean, that's what Bcash leads to. That's what that roadmap leads to. This is all of these systems are about incentives, like, period, end of the day. And that's where that roadmap leads in terms of incentives. And it's like they're already building out for that. They're already planning for it.
Well, it's been disturbing, dude.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess that about wraps it up, unless you or Janine have anything else to say.
No, I think we covered it.
I just want to remind everyone, in case, there's any Bitcoin Cash people watching the show, if you think, oh, surveillance bad, don't follow Jihan Wu, let's follow Craig Wright. Yeah, so he wants to do surveillance stuff too. Just a reminder.
Oh yeah. This is a good reminder. Sorry it took so long for the screen share. Laptop's fault. But Craig Wright is also the person who at Satoshi's Vision went on an insane rant about stopping double spending by keeping track of any conflicting transactions that miners mine. And if a merchant sees you double spent, tying into the security cameras at the merchant and providing the police with cryptographic proof that you attempted to double spend something, so you'd get thrown in jail. Yeah, newsflash. This roadmap leads to one place: Big Brother coin. End of story. It does not go any other way. It does not unfold any other way. It does not wind up any other place. So if you're jumping in bed with Bcash, you are literally asking for Big Brother coin. And don't say you haven't been warned, because people have been screaming about this for literally years.
Yeah, it goes same with all you investors in the U.S. I know that some of you people want this kind of thing, but it's not very American.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, I guess if anybody has any final thoughts, go ahead and spit them out.
Get out there and enjoy the last days of summer if you're in that part of the world where summer's about to end.
Janine, come on, cough up a thought. I demand it.
The weather is much better.
All right. Well, then get out there and enjoy it.
All right. Well, mine is, I would love to see Bitmain crash and burn, but honestly, I don't see anything else happening because of this except another knock down the rung. Like, I don't think this is actually going to bury them. It's just going to be a big kick in the dick that they're going to have to walk off. But I guess that is our cheating on the hiatus. And I'm sorry, but due to my stupid 10-year-old hard drive failing, the ZK snacks will probably take a little longer. I lost all the graphics that I'd been working on. Gonna have to redo them. But on that note, we're not cheating on the hiatus again, except for the ZK snacks. We will see you guys all at the end of break. Toodaloo.
Later, everyone.
Auf Wiedersehen.